The Prime Minister was about to convene the second emergency Cobra meeting in 2 days following another night of violence and unrest across various parts of the UK. The top prosecutor in England and Wales indicated that he might consider charging some individuals involved in the disorder with terrorism offences. Stephen Parkinson, the Director of Public Prosecutions, noted that he would examine organised groups that had planned significant disruption with the aim of advancing an ideology. The UK affairs correspondent, Sanford, reported that the recent wave of disorder had spread to Plymouth the previous night. While the violence there was less severe compared to other regions over the weekend, the riot police, who were stretched thin, still made several arrests. The authorities made it clear that they would not tolerate violence on the streets and were actively pursuing those who had committed criminal or public order offences, promising further arrests. The rioting, which had started in the wake of a mass stabbing in Southport, had extended to other areas including Ram, where a hotel housing asylum seekers was targeted. Concerns were raised that social media might be inciting the violence, with a former senior counter-terrorism officer pointing to Stephen Yaxley Lennon, also known as Tommy Robinson, who was currently in Cyprus. The head of the Crown Prosecution Service mentioned that extradition might be considered for anyone meeting the threshold for incitement, assuring that those involved would not be safe and would face justice, even if it took weeks or months. In Sheffield, some individuals arrested during the riots were appearing in court. Among them was 20-year-old Liam Gray, who denied a charge of violent disorder. All the adults involved in Sunday's riot were remanded in prison despite pleading not guilty, while only 2 teenagers, aged 16 and 17, were granted bail. Joshua Simpson, who admitted to assaulting a police officer, was also remanded in prison pending sentencing. The disorder in Middlesbrough led to 28 people appearing in court, prompting the Justice Secretary to expedite plans to create 500 additional prison places to manage the surge in cases. Greater Manchester Police unusually released images of 2 men charged after a protest in Bolton, Dominic Stanbridge and James Nelson, though they had not yet faced trial. There was also the first charge related to stirring up racial hatred, with 28-year-old Jordan Perrer pleading guilty to using threatening and abusive language in Facebook posts. He was also remanded in custody. The Director of Public Prosecutions mentioned that terrorism charges would be considered where there was evidence of serious planning to cause disruption. These legal actions occurred against a backdrop of concerns about around 40 protests planned for the following day. The Metropolitan Police stated that they would employ every available tactic and tool to prevent further disorder. In Belfast, police were investigating an assault on a man in his 50s as a racially motivated hate crime after witnesses reported that attackers had stamped on his head while others tried to shield him. During the second night of violence, bricks and metal rods were thrown at police, and officers used baton rounds to disperse the crowd, resulting in the arrest of a 15-year-old. The man who was assaulted suffered serious injuries. Detectives were treating this incident as a racially motivated hate crime. The recent scenes in Belfast included arson and racist assaults, with the violence occurring close to a supermarket that had been set on fire. The local council promised financial help for damaged businesses, but victims expressed that they could not afford further disruption. The unrest in Belfast was noted to be particularly intense in South Belfast, a diverse area. Northern Ireland had traditionally experienced low levels of immigration compared to the rest of the UK, and the scale of street violence against ethnic minority communities was unprecedented. A restaurant owner in Belfast, who chose not to appear on camera due to safety concerns, expressed frustration over the attacks on individuals based on their religion or background, highlighting her long-term contribution to the local community. The unrest across the UK over the past week was partly attributed to misinformation circulating online. The government had stated that social media companies had a moral responsibility to combat misinformation. The Prime Minister criticized Elon Musk, who owns X, formerly known as Twitter, for his comments suggesting the UK was heading towards civil war. Musk had also directly challenged the Prime Minister on his platform. Daniel DeSimon examined the role of social media in the ongoing disorder, noting that misinformation was spreading across platforms like TikTok, X, and Telegram, where extremist material was shared, including lists of targets such as hotels used by migrants and immigration solicitors. Encrypted apps like WhatsApp, which were harder to monitor, were also being used. Tommy Robinson, whose real name is Stephen Yaxley Lennon, was identified as a significant far-right voice spreading false and inflammatory posts. Elon Musk, having reinstated Robinson's account after acquiring the company, also contributed to the narrative of an impending civil war, challenging the Prime Minister and suggesting selective protection of certain communities. The government expressed concern about the material hosted on social media and urged companies not to wait for new legislation before acting. They suggested that there were existing criminal measures to address the disorder, from public order offenses to terrorism charges. Some voices advocated for additional legislation to create new offenses related to hateful extremism and to enforce greater responsibility on social media companies. Political correspondent Nick Orley reported from Downing Street that the upcoming Cobra meeting would focus on preventing further disruptions and addressing online activity. The Prime Minister had been emphasizing deterrence by naming suspects publicly, hoping to dissuade participation in the riots. Discussions were also underway with social media companies to tackle misinformation and incitement, although achieving consensus with these companies had been challenging. The government faced difficulties in regulating tech giants and creating stronger rules to combat false information.